If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniak. This story isn't all that insane like a lot of other stories, but deeply unnerving to me. I was about 10, as a club scout. Every year to raise money, my troop sold popcorn, usually door to door. A leader, or one of our parents, would usually follow us in the car and drive us to different neighborhoods, so we're not completely alone while doing this. Often though, there weren't enough volunteers to come along, so the adult would wait at the end of the street and check up on us every half hour or so. I knocked on the door of this house near the woods. A woman answered the door, but didn't come out fully. Instead, she cracked the door open and looked at me and spoke to me through the crack. This wasn't particularly odd, as most people weren't sure what we're doing there at first, but the way she looked at me through the door was different. I somehow didn't notice anything at the time, but her face was only half exposed and completely horizontal, which meant she was standing completely behind the door for some reason. I started going through my standard sales pitch, going on about supporting the troop and on how high our quality popcorn is. But she stopped me in a low voice and said, "Oh dear, why don't you come inside and tell me more about this?" Thankfully, I was a big fan of scary stories as a kid, so alarm bells began ringing. I asked her why she didn't come outside fully, and her reply is in the same tone. "I have cancer, I can't." Now, I didn't know much about cancer back then, but it didn't sound like a symptom to me. Before I could say anything else, she said, "Are you alone? Are you with anyone else?" I replied that the Cub Scout leader was down the street, and as soon as she heard that, she shut the door and locked it without a sound. I was about 8 or 9 years old when this happened, placing it around 2005 or 6. At the time I was living in Southwest Florida with my mum in a not so great part of town. So one day, my mum is driving me to a scout meeting for girls through the forest. I'm in the rear driver's side seat directly behind my mum. We're at a busy intersection in the turn lane waiting for the light to turn green for us to make a right. This guy comes running down the middle of the road, like literally running between cars on the main road. He's screaming, "Help! Help me please." My mum sees him in the rearview mirror on her side, and although she's in a good place to be a kind person, she's also cautious, so cracks down her window maybe 4 or 5 inches to see what's wrong, thinking maybe he's gotten into a car accident or something. Guy comes running up to my mother's window, shoves his arm into the car, almost up to his elbow. He's obviously trying to open the door or hit the power locks or windows to get in. My mum, being the badass she is, punches the crap out of this guy, and you can hear a pop and a crack sound. She must have broken at least one of his fingers. She rolls the windows up, crushing his fingers and more bones than I ever thought you could in an arm. Meanwhile, I'm in the backseat, petrified to move. He starts beating on the window, saying we better let him in or he's gonna kill us. At this point, the light turns green, and as soon as the car in front of us turned, my mum burned rubber to get out of there. We make it to the location for the scout meeting. By this time, I'm no longer in shock and start freaking out. I start crying a bit, but everything's okay. My mum calls the police department to let them know what happened, and we fled the scene. The officer informs her that someone's been robbed not even a block away from the intersection we're at. The suspect had fled on foot and eventually was caught, but the officer assumed that the man who tried to break into our car was the same one. At the time, I didn't think too deep into it. As I've got older, I started to think about it and just how dangerous it was. What if he was able to get in? What if he hurt my mum or me? What if he pulled out on my mum's driver's seat and drove away, or maybe had a weapon? Last summer, I was camping with my partner and our 30-pound dog alone in a creek in a popular area in a nearby national forest. It was an established site, but not a campground. Parking spot, fire ring, nice flat area with access to the creek. Now in the dead of night, we're awoken by a large truck parked by our car just idling. Eventually 3 men get out, they enter our camp. They're talking quietly. The truck and creek makes us unable to hear anything they're saying. I'm pretty sure it's not good now. Meanwhile, our dog has been growling in a low tone the entire time. Early on, I whispered to my partner to be quiet and hold the dog and hide. I got out of our sleeping bag, put my shoes on. The only thing I had for defense was a forest axe, halfway between a hatchet and axe. Very useful for getting by in the woods. I had a leather sheath with a metal button latch to protect the blade. Now they took their time, perhaps as intimidation, but eventually got closer to our tent. I loudly popped the metal button for the latch, taking the sheath off, preparing to become an axe murderer. Or maybe be murdered myself, apparently. All 3 of the men hear the latch. My assumption is they thought it's a gun holster, quickly left the camp, getting in their trucks and leaving without a word. I grew up in a small coal town in the Appalachian Mountains. On the side of one of the mountains that borders the valley of the town, it's a lovely place for an outdoorsy kid. We have no immediate neighbours and acres of woods to play in. Above our house was a ridge that ran along the border of a state park, but all the trails and public areas were far in the valley below, separated by a thick forest with plenty of no trespassing signs. So we very rarely had hikers crossing over onto our land. From our home, there was a dirt road that wound up the mountainside to the top of the ridge. Where there stood the remains of a burnt down cabin. From there, you could follow the ridge to a flat area with Dad's hunting friends, one of whom posted a trail cam to monitor off-season activity. From there, you could continue up the ridge to a clearing that hosted lots of flat boulders and a giant electric tower that was fun to climb on. I'd venture up there often with the family's black Labrador, spending hours reading, climbing and enjoying nature. One early fall day when I was 13, I headed up there with a backpack full of snacks and a book. I'd taken care to avoid the trail cam, as it was the old film variety, and I gotten in trouble for accidentally filling entire rolls with me goofing around in the area. I reached my favourite rock at the edge of the clearing near the power lines, and just settled down to read when Felicia started to bark and growl aggressively. At first, I paid no attention to it, as she loves to chase deer, but this time, she didn't bound off into the woods after her quarry. Instead, She snuck up next to me, growling at something unseen in the thick tangle of brush and trees on the steep mountainside that faces a park. Now, I'd consider hiking down that way into the park on occasion, but it wasn't an easy passage. The area had been cleared years before to install an electrical tower, and in its place had grown a thick mass of barbs and weeds. The rocks that were made great for climbing are on top of the ridge. Not to mention, there was much easier access closer to the park entrance. This brought you down to an undeveloped area at the very back of the campgrounds that wasn't easily accessible to cars or hikers. So I was taken off guard to see a man fighting his way through the brush in that direction. Nervously I called out hello, gripped Felicia's collar. She had a tendency to jump on people when she gets excited, and I didn't want to tumble her down the mountain. I'd overheard my parents arguing about lawsuits when she barreled a jogger over the trail park. The man smiles, coughs, and makes his way up the hill to the base of my rock. I don't know if it was Felicia's reaction to him, or the rather remote and impassable way that he'd come from, but his presence made me uneasy. He seemed normal and friendly enough. He was probably in his mid to late 20s, average height and build. Rather unremarkable looking. No backpack or supplies, but he was dressed as a hiker would be. He didn't like the way he looked at me, although, in my young age, I couldn't place why it unsettled me. As a grown woman, I can look back and realize how he was sizing me up. He had a big smile on his face too. Hi there. Where'd you come from? No trace of an accent. Sticking out to me as odd. Our people have a strong regional accent, and we don't get any outsiders here. I live just down the hill. I was hiking with my dog. She seems like a nice dog, he told me, with no trace of irony. Felicia starts snarling and vibrating with menace, but he seems unfazed. Weird again. You should have her on a leash though, you don't want to get in trouble. I say we put her on a leash and we're down in the park, but this is our property. No reaction to learning he was essentially trespassing. Still, you're so close, you don't know who you might run up on here. I said no one comes up here, being a bit rude. He said I'm from the park, grinning. I'm one of the park rangers, and I wanted to see the property. What would you have done if she'd attacked me? You get in big trouble. At this time, I'm immediately chilled. We only had one ranger, and he was a close friend of the family. This guy was not him. But I was afraid to let on that I knew he was lying, so I dug out Felicia's collar and clipped her on the leash. Sorry, we'll let you get on with the hike, I have to go home, he says. Your parents know you're up here. Oh yeah, they expect me home soon. Do they often come here? Well, my dad does. He comes up to check on the trail cams. Trail cams? Yeah, there's loads up here. He smiled but looks cold. Well, these would make excellent hunting grounds. He took a step towards me and Felicia lunged, nearly yanking the leash out of my hands. I managed to haul her back in time. His smile was gone. You should head back, I say, keeping a tight hold on the leash. Now, maybe I'll see you up here again sometime. Yeah, maybe, I said, secretly thinking to myself that I'd never step foot in the woods again. Well, bye. I quickly dragged Felicia away, looking back over my shoulder every now and then. He remains motionless in the spot where I'd left him, staring after me with that same smile. Once he was out of sight, I pick up the pace. Felicia growled over her shoulder a few times, and occasionally I heard branches snap behind me, but glancing back, I saw no sign of him following. I cut straight across the clearing with the trail cam, not bothering to avoid it in my rush to get away from the stranger. Once we hit the road that led home, I unclipped Felicia from the leash and broke into a jog. She remained by my side until I got home. I didn't mention the strange man to my parents at first. They're very wary of me going hiking alone, and I knew I wouldn't be let out if I said it. By the time I got home, I convinced myself that I'd overreacted to the whole thing. He's probably just a hiker and made up the bit about being a ranger to mess with me. Still, I didn't hike up to that ridge that week, instead sticking to the woods nearby. At the end of the week though, I came home from school to an annoyed dad demanding to know if I'd messed with the trail cam. His buddy had actually come up to collect the film, discovering the cameras switched off, with a few frames taken off. At first I was only concerned with getting in trouble and desperately professed innocence, and then I remembered the stranger. After telling Dad about him, he calls the park ranger to ask if there was a new ranger we didn't know about. He said no, but after hearing my story, he told Dad the campground attendant who caught an out-of-stater overnighting in an unauthorized area back behind the campground the previous weekend. He'd assumed the guy was trying to get out of paying the fee. Young guy, average looking, overly friendly. He said it was a mistake and took off. Shortly after, we heard from Dad's buddy with the trail cam. He got on the roll developed, even though there's only a few frames still filled up. The last one is of me and Felicia cutting across the clearing. Thank God I told the stranger there's multiple cams. I imagine he'd given up after locating the other ones. My parents have since moved into a little snug neighbourhood down in the valley. I moved out of town, in my parents' backyard, on the river. There's a mountain covered by Easter lilies that marks Felicia's final resting place. The house I grew up in fell into despair and was sold and essentially burned to the ground. No one lives there now, but the clearing at the top is still popular with hunters. When I visit, I still hike up that ridge and always bring a dog with me. It was summer, I believe the day after the 4th of July, and my husband and I are in the middle of a crossroad trip. We're driving through Texas. Now, for any of you who have driven through Texas, you would have known how big the state actually is. Sometimes you'll go hours without seeing anything at all, and the towns we did pass through didn't consist of very much. Maybe an old rusty petrol station, a few little houses. Looking out the window, you'd swear you're driving through the same desert over and over again. I mean, I actually started getting a headache, and my husband suggested I took a quick nap to get rid of it. I remember allowing myself to doze off as I watched the beautiful colours of a desert sunset. The smell of the car awoke in me. Now, the first thing I noticed is the beautiful colours of a desert sunset. The swaying of the car woke me up, and the first thing I noticed is how dark it is. I believe it's around 10 PM. My husband had stopped at a gas station with a shop. He told me he was going to grab us some food, asking if I needed to pee. Knowing I might not have another chance for quite a while when I went to the shop to use the restroom. Both the men's and women's restrooms are a little down the hall from the open area of the shop. I was groggy and tired and realised how badly I need to pee. So I shuffled into the restroom, made my way the short distance from the door to the nearest 2 stalls. I then make eye contact with a woman coming out of the other stall. She doesn't look quite homeless, but she was definitely a mess. Her hair was wild and grey, almost shoulder length if I hadn't been looking carefully. It looked as though she hadn't seen a brush for months. She wore ragged looking clothes, a pair of ill-fitting blackout shorts, and I remember noticing her foam flip-flops. She had several layers on top, one of them being a large purple and green coat. Keep in mind this is Texas in July. The jacket is hanging out over her shoulders like she hadn't taken it off properly. She was carrying something in a tied up grocery bag. I gave her a quick smile as our eyes met. She just stares at me in return. Then the face turns wild and intense looking. Her eyebrows were set as though she's angry, but her eyes looked alive and wild. She looked at me like she's hungry. This made me feel that something was wrong with her. I try and brush it off. She waddled over to the only sink and I took my time shutting the door because something about her posture in front of the mirror struck me as odd. She was standing with her body angled towards me, but her face was turned to the mirror. Her body was tensed, legs slightly crouched as though she's ready to act. Her hands were not up by her face, like you would be at a mirror. I wasn't sure why, but I felt uncomfortable. Now I regretted leaving my purse and things away from me with my cell phone in it. I shut the door, locking the stall behind me using the toilet. I wanted her gone before I left the safety of the stall. I stayed there long after I had finished, but the woman was still there, so I waited longer. Finally I heard the smacking of her flip-flops on her way to the door. I heard it open and slam close. The door was pretty heavy, having actually slammed the same way when I entered. I stayed for a moment and allowed a wave of relief to wash over me before I reached for the lock, then paused. Fingers only inches away from the lock. I'm now silent as I can manage to be, and yes, I hear breathing. The woman pretended to leave. At this point I was scared and confused. Why she tried to trick me into thinking she had left, only to stick around and be as quiet as possible. I knew something was wrong, so I stayed in the store even longer. This time it must have been about 20 minutes. I had no way of knowing for sure. I could tell from the direction her breathing was coming from. She positioned herself in the far corner, right next to the door, but far enough that I couldn't see her. Finally I hear her leave. This time I waited a few minutes to make sure she hadn't tried her trick again. I slipped out of the stall quickly, washing my hands and rushing down the hallway to the store. It's pitch black outside. I had no idea where she was. She couldn't be far. A large man was checking out the register, so I waited near a window display until he left the store and quietly slipped out behind the door. Sure enough, crouched right outside of the door is the woman, surprised as she stands and turns away to the side of the store, walking quickly. My husband's waiting in the car and says am I okay, as I took a while. I said I'd say about it when we got away from the store. Easily the most scary experience of my life. It's kind of a running joke in my office that I always get the weirdest calls, and it's true. One of the more interesting ones I got was from a drunk guy who meant to call the cops and was trying to file a noise complaint about his own party. Well, some of my calls can be pretty strange. They're usually fairly tame. I've been pretty lucky because I haven't had too many disturbing calls or sad stories from my years of working as a 911 operator. If you're looking for something like that, I can point you to several of my colleagues because unfortunately, there's no shortage of these in this industry. The call that particularly sticks out in my mind is one I had about a year or two ago. I can honestly say it's one of the most frightening experiences of my entire life, and think it's going to stick with me forever. It had actually been a fairly slow afternoon that day. I know it sounds kind of insensitive, but if you're not taking a call, the job can get pretty boring. I got stuck covering my friend's evening shift and didn't expect things to be more interesting. I was counting down the minutes until my shift ended when a call came through my line. I put the headset on and ran through the usual script. 911, what's your emergency? I think there's someone in my home. The voice sounded as though it belonged to a young child. My heart sank immediately. Calls from children are the worst. We're trained to get as much information from each caller as possible. This makes it easy to more fully understand the situation, as well as figure out which emergency service is needed. What's your name, sweetheart? I kept my voice upbeat and calm. There was no need in screaming, because I just make them more scared. Elizabeth, she said softly. I think she's crying. That's a beautiful name. Mine's Amelia. Even though I didn't show it, I'm nervous now. This is very important. Can you tell me what's happening right now? The line was quiet for a moment before Elizabeth began speaking. I think someone's in my home. Where are your parents? I ask. They're not home. I don't know where they are. I was pretty angry when I heard this. What kind of parents leave a little girl home alone late at night? Is there anyone else there with you? I say. Yeah, I think they're looking for me. Elizabeth began before her voice abruptly stopped at the very end of the sentence. Had it not been for her quiet, frightened breaths, I would have thought she or whoever else was there hung up. They said my name, she says. Where are you now? I heard a door click. In my parents' closet. She spoke a little louder now, probably thinking the intruder wouldn't be able to hear her from in there. I hope she's right. I was glad that she knew to hide. A lot of kids freeze up in dangerous situations like this, especially if their older siblings aren't there. I asked her for her address, which she gave to me, but for the sake of privacy, I was only gonna say Elizabeth's house was in a fairly nice neighborhood in my area, and it's not far from the police station, which is very helpful. Elizabeth, just focus on my voice now, I said. I need you to try and relax. I'm sending the police to your house right now. They should be there in about 5 minutes. Can you hold on until then? Even though I would usually try to get a little more information about the intruder, I always tend to err on the side of caution when speaking to children. I'd much rather send someone and have it be a false alarm than a safety risk. Elizabeth did not answer my question. It took her longer than I was comfortable with to respond. When she did, it was only with one word. Listen. I heard the phone crackle as she brought it away from her ear, holding it out. At first, I didn't hear anything, but as I focused on the background noise, I noticed a lot of whispering. I really couldn't tell what they were saying, but it definitely sounded like it was coming from more than one person. I hope the police would get there on time, as much as I hope people with my job and as many lives as I saved. It is always so frustrating I can't do anything but talk. Elizabeth's voice came out in hushed sobs. He's coming up here, please. The police are almost there. I need you to be quiet so he doesn't hear you. You're gonna be okay, I promise. She calms down now. Everything was quiet for a moment, save for the whispering, which was much louder now. I didn't know what they were saying, but I was sure it is coming from multiple people. I could pick out at least 3 distinctive voices. When I heard a door crackle open through my phone, my heart leaped. Elizabeth screams, and I knew the intruders had found her. I was so devastatingly scared. Are you okay? I need to know what's happening. I was trying and failing to stop my voice from cracking. There's a man. He has really long legs and a really big smile. I heard another bang coming from somewhere in the house and people yelling police, thank God. I could hear Elizabeth crying as she whispers and the situation intensifies. I still don't know how she only saw one person. There had to have been more than 4. He isn't touching the floor. The line cuts off. I frantically try to re-establish a connection, but no matter how many times I try, I'm only met with static. Now, I haven't heard anything since. Elizabeth or her family haven't been seen either since this happened. The police only find the phone.
Ten out of 10. Best horror in the Pacific Northwest. Horror at NW Magazine. Not for the faint of heart. Sealess Woods is the pinnacle of horror. Connor McIntosh, creator of Zomglass. Something about it felt so real. H&S Insider. Melanie read the reviews for the newest scare park that was taking the county by storm, as if trying to convince me to go. I don't know why she felt she needed to do so. I'd gone to every single frightening thing she'd ever talked about. I loved the thrill almost as much as she did. Mel, I stopped her from reading the next part mid-sentence. Let's do it, next weekend. I turned around to face her, after sliding on my favourite silver necklace. Damn, you look so sexy. Mel shut up and looked at me twice. I had a date tonight, and although I certainly didn't feel sexy, I seized opportunity to put on a dress I'd purchased a year ago and never had the chance to wear. A tight-fitting pale yellow with floral stitching down the side. Matched with heels and hoop earrings. I'll take that back. I do feel sexy. I'm gonna slay this date. Message received, 9:03. Hey, Han. I'm really sorry, but something urgent came up. I'm not gonna be able to make it tonight. Rain check for tomorrow. The look on my face must have been pretty obvious, because when I look up from my phone, Mel looked even more furious than I was disappointed. No. He's not banging on you again. She started, her voice raising with every no. I didn't even say, you don't have to, Hannah. I've been your best friend for our whole life. Listen, we're gonna go. Her eyes lit up as she came up with an idea. I hate that look. It always ends in a situation I'd rather not be in. Mel began excitedly pointing at her phone, turning it around for me to see. We have 2 minutes. Swap in some flats. We're making it into Sealess tonight. The feeling of rejection and submitting to sitting in my room another night alone was immediately replaced with a childlike excitement. I quickly did as my best friend suggested and swapped my heels for a pair of black running shoes, which I decided were a better choice than flats. I wanted to change into some more casual clothes as well, but we had to run right away if we wanted to catch the bus in time without waiting for another 30 minutes. We managed to catch it right on time, and 20 minutes later we were arriving at the park's entrance. It was a sight to behold. Held just outside of Portland's city limits, Sealess Woods was crafted out of the environment itself. There were hardly any signs and lights that would normally be seen around the start of the theme park, but rather everything was dimly lit, and low orchestra type music was being played through the hidden speakers all throughout the trees leading to the main gate. A stark contrast to the nerdy looking boy who was at the ticket booth, which had been nothing more than a hole cut into a rather large tree. He smiled and gave us our tickets, and went back into playing what looked like Fruit Ninja on his company iPad. Okay, I say fuck saving best for last. Let's do the haunted walk first, yeah? Mel spoke excitedly. I nodded, and we made our way through the trails to the entrance, where there was a ridiculously long line. I mean like 2 hours wait long. Well, good thing we went here first. By the time we get in, the park will be closed. I rumbled annoyed. Why did parks like these never seem to have lines that were manageable? Mel agreed, but seemed content just to sit around and wait, so we did. We ran through just about every conversation topic we could think of, ranging from how much an arse Dan was being for cancelling on me tonight, to Mel's nervous excitement about being the lead of the school's play that was set to start practice in 2 weeks. As we got closer, we started gauging the looks on people who were leaving the park's faces to see if everything in those walls really lived up to the hype. Some looked scared out of their minds, some were nervously laughing, some showed no expression at all. Overall though, it seemed like more people were genuinely afraid. That was good. One thing that I was beginning to notice, however, was that there seemed to be less people coming out than going in. At first I struck it up to people getting lost in the maze, or me just not paying attention to people coming out, but as we get closer, it began to be more noticeable. "Hey, does it seem to you like less people are going out than coming in?" I asked Mel. She shot me a sly glance and a smile. "Don't try and scare me, Han. It's not gonna work." "No, I'm serious. I think..." I was cut off by the attendant asking for our tickets and quickly ushering us inside. Well, I guess it's too late to go back now. I admit, I felt more anxious than I normally do, but maybe that's why this particular park is rated so high. Good on them. As soon as you walk inside the area designated for the attraction, you're confronted with the option to go right, which leads to a building that's flashing with all sorts of lights and colours, or going left into what looks like a confined style maze. I motion left and Melanie starts on that way. We work our way around, the sound of distant screaming, loud bangs of hands on loose metal, and of course the revving of chainsaws fills the air. My nerves are on end as we creep through the hedges of the stalker corn. I can feel one of them stalking us, trying to keep quiet until the perfect moment to jump out and get us. The problem is, I don't know where he's watching from. It could literally be any direction. Finally, as we're about to leave the open field into what looks like a burned down barn, with similar flashing lights to the original building if we'd turned right, he gets us. Well, he gets Mel. I was about 2 feet behind her in a narrow hallway that only allowed for one of us to go at a time. When he springs through the bushes, emerging between 2 of us and grabbing her shoulder before screaming in her face, she turns around. "Hey, you're not allowed to touch me," Mel screams as she frantically backs away, after which the actor sprints off into the hedges, giggling maniacally the whole way. Oh, I hate it when they do that. I can't help but laugh. I know deep down she was loving it, but she doesn't act like it when she's actually got. I smile at her and beckon for her to walk through the door in front of us. "No, allow that. You lead this time." Mel puts her head down, muttering under her breath about how she's going to tell the man's boss that he touched her and on and on. I roll my eyes and push forward, feeling a little better than I had before. The inside of the barn was made to feel very cramped and claustrophobic. Every hallway required you to squeeze by a rag doll, or a stuffed pig carcass, or something equally as disgusting. Mirrors lined the walls, showing rooms where unlucky patients were getting tortured or beaten. It felt extremely real, terrifyingly real. The sense of security I felt after Melanie had gotten jumped on and myself had vanished almost instantly. As we walked, the sound of metal scraping metal followed us. I grabbed Melanie's hand as we navigated the corridors, and screeched along with her as a man's painting came alive and screamed at us. The rooms where visitors were getting tortured were getting worse. The screams became more bloody the further we went. I rounded the corner and immediately fell back onto my back as a man with a chainsaw stood waiting for me, turning it on and laughing at me with dramatic effect. I let go of Melanie's hand just for a moment to brace my fall, and when I turned back to find her, she was gone. "Melanie!" I yelled, panic welling up in my throat. "Mel, this isn't funny!" I don't know where she could have been hiding, or why she felt now was the best time to prank me, but she was going to get a firm scolding from me as soon as I could breathe on my own again. "Hannah, help me!" I heard a cry for help, and in an instant I knew something was wrong. Melanie didn't scare easily, so the fact that they got one over her earlier would normally have put me on shutdown mode, but this was her screaming for her life. I turned to the man with a chainsaw, but he was gone. Raising to my feet, I sprinted in the direction of Melanie's voice. Somehow she had gotten ahead of me. I pushed past the junk hanging from the ceiling, and completely ignored the rooms to the side, solely focused on finding my friend. "Hannah!" She screamed again, but this time it was from behind me. How? There was only one path. I turned back around, and at this point I began to wonder where the next people in the line were. Shouldn't they be following behind us soon? Maybe they could help. A sickening thud shook my head to the left as a body slammed up against a glass to one of the torture rooms. My heart dropped. Inside I saw Mel, and she was being dragged backwards and tied down onto a table in the middle of the room. Her screams no longer audible as a rag was shoved into her mouth. Her eyes panicked, looking directly at me the whole time. I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. It didn't matter. Moments after she was tied down, the person in the room looked at me and smiled a bloody smile before jamming a twisted blade into her gut. I screamed, and I hate to admit it, but I ran. I wish I could say that I knew that there was no hope for her, and I left knowing there was nothing I could do, but I was only saving myself. I was too terrified to do anything else. I managed to slip into a side room I found. It's definitely one of the torture rooms, but there's no one in here and all the lights are out. I called the police about an hour ago, and they should have shown up by now, but I can still hear the screams out there. When I called the operator back, they could only tell me that 2 squads had been sent out, and that they would stay on the line with me until they got there. I was nervous that my voice would call someone to find me though, so I hung up. I'm typing this out, huddled in the corner of the room that could very well be my grave. If anyone's near, please help me. I don't know how long I'll make it here, and I think I hear the footsteps.
Last night at around 2:30 AM, I was awoken by a phone call. I assumed it was spam, maybe an ex-girlfriend calling me to say something dumb, and instinctively reached over to decline the call. My tired brain didn't even bother seeing who it was as I hung up and go back to sleep. I got another call around 5 minutes later. I groaned and reached to decline it again, but this time I saw who was calling me. 911. Why was 911 calling me? I checked the time. It's 2:35. A call from the police at 2:35? I'm confused and answered the call. Hello? I don't hear anything at first. Hello, I say again. Hi. A raspy voice slowly replies. This would have been the part where I would have thrown my phone across the bed, but for whatever reason, I decided to keep on talking. Who is this? I said, forgetting for a second it's obvious. Didn't the number appear when I called? It's the police, you idiot. I remember trying to decline the call around this point, but the button didn't work. What the hell? I muttered to myself, hearing the person on the other end laugh to himself. Idiot, you're an idiot, the voice quietly said, irritated. I asked, you don't sound like an operator. Oh, I'm an operator, alright, the voice hissed, but not one that's willing to kiss you anymore. This was confusing. What are you talking about? I said, trying to hang up again, but it won't even let me cut the power to my phone. I was being forced to listen to some cranky guy spit a bunch of nonsense. The voice seemed to ignore my previous question and kept on talking. I'm an operator. I can do anything an operator can do, and more. The voice chuckled to himself again before he kept going. I'm sorry for messing up your good night's sleep, but you need to know about something. What the hell? I realised whoever I was talking to was part of the police and stopped myself for a second. What should I know about? Now there's another pause before the operator starts talking again. Before I ask anything, do you remember everyone who called you today? Well, besides you, no one today. Why'd you ask? The operator breathed in what sounds like a sigh of relief, but his voice made it very hard to tell exactly what it was. Good. That means our plan's still working. You're not the only one who picked up so far. Plus, the simple fact that you picked up pretty much forces you to go with what we've planned. I said, what do you mean? Before I'm interrupted by multiple notifications. I have 4 or so text messages, all different numbers. I opened up one of them. It was a house. The image looked as though it was taken in the middle of the night. The sky dark. None of the windows have light. Doesn't look like any house from my neighborhood. Not even any houses I recognise from nearby. I open up another 3 texts. They all show similar images. An image of someone's house taken in the middle. What's this? I ask. I already said. You aren't the first one who received a call like this. These are all from the last 4 months. You, sir, are looking at dead people's homes. What? You're looking at dead people's houses. All of these people lost the game, so we killed them. You're not serious, are you? The operator laughed again. I hate his laugh. His scratchy, mocking laugh so much. You idiot, of course we're serious. You want to see the bodies? No, I don't. Coward. Fine. You don't doubt that I'm a 911 operator, right? What kind of operator talks about killing people in some game? You're not an operator. You're a maniac. I found myself shouting suddenly. What the hell do you want from me? Why did you call? Ah, fine. I confess. I may or may not be a 911 operator. There. Happy now? Please leave me alone. Hang up the phone, don't call back. I will call the police on you, even if you're an operator. The operator begins clacking. He kept on clacking for way too long. Oh, you idiot, you blind idiot. What police? That's when he hung up on me. I started to fall asleep again. I then got another text message from one of the phone numbers that was basically a recording of the whole conversation. The message claimed that he said something that gave it away, but after listening to it a few times, I still don't know what he's talking about.
Sometimes at family reunions, we'll get my uncle to tell us some of his old stories. He normally tells us about robberies and stuff like that, but yesterday he told us a different story. He told us about a missing person call, which was another type of story he would tell us a lot about, but this one was very different. From what he told us, it was about someone's husband who had gone out to work in that morning and never came back. He apparently worked as a park ranger at a nearby park, and he normally just worked in the office. Apparently he left at 6 in the morning, which was already earlier than he normally left in the morning, and then called around 10 to say he was going to be working late, and never came home. They sent out a lot of people to look for him in the area, but they didn't find him near the offices at all. A couple of hours after the initial call, he received another call about the same topic, but from a different person. This time the call was from another park ranger. He was panicking and couldn't get many words out before crying. In the time before the call cut off, the guy made out 2 general ideas. He said that he found the guy who went missing earlier that day, and that the guy was out of his mind. The search continued on for a week, and neither the man nor the second caller were found. After all that effort was put in, they called the search off. But for some reason, my uncle just knew the man was still out there. It didn't take long for another call to come in about him either. This time coming from a younger woman, probably around 20 years old. She was terrified, and talking about how she found a corpse of a dead park ranger. My uncle immediately knew what she was talking about, and sent a squad out to investigate it. They found the girl, and she told him that she found it roughly 30 minutes before they arrived. They took his cell phone from his pocket, and sure enough, the last phone call in it was from 2 weeks before, and it was to 911. Because of the amount of time between the call and him being found, there was no real way to track down the killer, but the kill was gruesome. The man's legs had been violently ripped off, and his eyes were, well, gone. He also had 3 rather large, deep slash wounds in his chest. The police reopened the search for the initial missing person, and within 3 days of doing so, found his corpse in a cave. The cave had writing all over the walls, but it all said the same thing. It all said, "He's coming for me." The man's corpse had the same injuries the first victim had, and the police reported that it was most likely caused by the same entity. The police also reported that the entire time they were in the cave, they felt like they were being watched. Over the next month, every police officer that entered the cave was killed, and every officer bared the same wound as the 2 park rangers. The only person left who had been part of the case after a 6-month period was my uncle. This was the last story my uncle ever told at a family gathering, because last night they found him sitting in his bed, both his legs were ripped off, and 3 deep gouges going into his chest.
This was the most scary call I ever had as a 911 operator, and probably not for the reason you'd think. 911, what's your emergency? Yes, it's been going on for a while now. Oh, okay, what's that? I really don't want to talk about it, but I need your help now. Sir, I need to know your problem, or we can't send the appropriate help. I really want to help you now, I just need some details of the situation, and if you're in immediate danger. They're coming for me right now, I don't know what to do. I've been on the run for weeks now. I'm in a isolated area of forests. I'm in a small abandoned cabin right now. I think they're getting closer. Okay, how many of them are there? Do you know your exact address? Look, no I don't. I need your help now. I said, sir, we'll dispatch a police car as soon as we know where you are. We're unable to trace your location. He then begins whispering to me. I struggle to hear what he says at first, but then when I hear it, I am terrified. He begins describing my exact appearance and what I'm wearing on the day of the call. He then reads out my exact address and when I'll be home. He begins laughing and ends the call.
Just some info. I'm 23, male, single, and living in my first home. I'm currently sitting in my bedroom with the door locked for a reason. The lights go out every night. Every single night around 11:30 to 11:45, the lights in my entire house go out, and I hear noises throughout my house. It started about 2 weeks ago. I was going through our funny when I saw the lights turned off outside my door from the tiny sliver under it. I immediately bolted up and locked my door, terrified that a burglar was in my house. I waited for a few minutes because maybe it's just a bulb blowing, but then I heard sounds. Slight scratching, tiny scratches outside my door, followed by what I thought sounded like whispering. I'm a paranoid person, so as paranoid people do, I called 911 and told them there's someone nearby in my house. Shortly after I told them what happened, the lights came back on and the sound stopped. Do I go outside? What if they're still there? I have no idea what to do. I decided to keep my door locked and go to sleep. The next morning, everything seemed normal. No signs of forced entry into my house. I couldn't even find any scratch marks, and I began to think it was all in my head. I went to work and had a normal day. I came home, poured myself a glass of wine, and went into my bedroom to browse Reddit. 11:35. Crack. Lights out. Something is without a doubt wrong. This is the second time. I know there's someone in my home. Again I call the police. They come and find nothing. I told them I didn't feel safe, and they told me to stop calling unless it's something seriously wrong. I can't turn to the police. I need to take matters into my own hands. I set up surveillance camera systems around my house. It plays live through my phone and my laptop 24/7. I'm gonna catch this thing. Next night, 11:40, I'm watching the feed. Lights out, right on schedule. My door's locked. I'm ready to see who's breaking into my home. What I see next is why I'm no longer staying at my home, and staying at a friend's house. On camera 3, right in front of my bedroom door, I saw her. I saw a girl. She's standing in front of my door. I yell out, "What do you want?" No response. "Get out my house!" Nothing. What is this? Is this a game? Am I gonna die? Then I realise there's a girl on every camera feed. They're all staring at me. They know I'm watching. They just know. Just for an update, after a long night of staring at the girls, who were maybe age 12, who all wore raggedy clothes and had black hair, they stare at the camera every night. I've given the footage to the police, and they told me this is the weirdest thing they ever saw. I'm staying with a friend now, but here's where it gets really bad. I have reason to believe that the girls are coming from One Hope Orphanage for Girls, an orphanage that I thought was abandoned, but I guess not. Do I go back home?
This occurred about 7 years ago, on my way home from my parents. I was 22, young, naive, and well, dumb. I just moved into my own apartment. I was the first in my family to move away from my sleepy old train town that I grew up in. So, I went home every Sunday night to visit my family, but mostly do laundry, eat Sunday dinner. I lived about 45 to 60 minutes up the highway, so I generally headed home by 6. Now on this night in particular, there was this summer thunderstorm that had been pouring rain relentlessly all day long. My cousins popped in as I was just packing up to leave after dinner, so I ended up sticking around a couple more hours to visit. I left my mum's at around 10 PM in the pouring rain, and this was my first time after moving in that I encountered something that really scared me. I don't know why I never told anyone this. I think it had to do with pride. Everyone always gave me trouble about living alone as a female. But here goes my story. I left my parents at around 10 PM in the pouring rain. Now as a side note, I hate driving in the rain. So I'm driving down the service road that leads out of town and eventually turns into an on-ramp on the highway. As you're leaving town, this service road turns on the right lane in front of this quarry train loading station. Now I'm not really sure what this place actually is, but it gives me the creeps. If you're unfortunate enough to pass through when a train is crossing the road, you'll be stuck there for a while. Once the road passes the tracks, it turns into 2 lanes that goes up a steep hill. As I'm approaching the quarry, I can now make out the orange lights on a red cab 18-wheeler sitting in the quarry parking lot. Mind you, it's pouring rain. The visibility is low, so I can't quite make out what the truck is actually doing, but I slam on my brakes avoiding hitting him. I skirt around on the road again and regain control. So now, I'm stuck behind this idiot that just pulled out on me without paying any attention. I keep my distance behind him because I'm a little flustered. For the record, my headlights are on, so if I'd been paying attention, he should not have been able to see me. But honestly, with it raining so much and the visibility so low, who knows? So I'm behind this guy as we cross the tracks and begin to climb this steep hill. Despite it raining, and I'm now turning into 2 lanes on the hill, he's driving right up the middle of the 2. Figured he didn't realise it was 2 lanes, so I just put along the side of him to keep my distance. As soon as he reaches the peak of the hill, the road begins to level out and he moves over to the right lane again. Yes, finally. So I move over and begin to pass him. As soon as I get past the front of the truck, he swerves behind me quite a bit abruptly and begins flashing his high beams at me. Usually when someone flashes their lights behind you in our area, that means turn on your lights. I check, but mine are already on. I'm really scared now and put on my blinker and safely change lanes away from him. He then follows my lane, begins laying on the horn. His honking startled me. I began to get a little flustered. What the hell does this guy want? He moved out of his way, headlights are on. So why didn't I just speed up and zip away, you might be asking? Well, I grew up here. It's been raining heavily all day, and I know that the service roads flood a lot, both on the hard shoulder and in random spots in the middle lanes. Now it's a small middle west town. Our roads are crap. I already skidded and nearly wrecked once. I wasn't about to floor it on these bumpy service roads and risk that happening again. So this goes on for the next 5 miles to the highway. He's tailgating me in addition to having his high beams on and honking. Once the tailgating begins, I'm in tears. I don't know what this guy wants from me. I'm trying to stay out of his way and get home safely. That's all I care about. I changed lanes at least 2 more times, making the total of 3. He followed me from lane to lane as we approached the highway. I floor it. He couldn't accelerate quickly enough to keep up, and I lose him finally. As soon as I realise I've lost him, and I'm safe on the highway, I just lost it, a hysterical wreck. There is only one exit after getting onto the highway to stop in a small town that runs through it. After that it's all wooden roads for a good 30 minutes. I thought about getting off at the next exit after that to calm down and try and pull it together, but I just want to go home and sleep. That's all I care about. So I sped right past it, but I should have stopped. Once more, I look in my rear view, and the visibility is so low that I can't even see the city. I'm more calm now. I managed to scramble for my cell phone and put it in my purse just in case. The rain let up to a drizzle the further I went. I was pretty on edge. There weren't many other cars on the highway and the majority of them were truckers. I'm cruising along in the central lane when the next truck over to me begins blaring the horn, moving to my lane, forcing me over to a third. He continued moving over, nearly forcing me off the highway. I sped up, changed lanes right in front of him so that I'm in the centre lane. I slowed down so I'm in line with the front cab. I double click the home button on my phone, roll down the window, start taking pictures of the cabbie. I think the flash made him realise what I was doing, and he began slowing down until he's behind me. I get a lot of pictures though. Sped up, losing sight of him behind me. I was satisfied that I managed to get a couple of pictures of him, but so angry. I pull over onto the shoulder of the highway and wait for him. I just want to get behind him so I can take a picture of the license plate and report him. I then notice headlights behind me. Now it's a long way back, but nevertheless, on the shoulder of the highway, I waited, keeping an eye out for the truckers passing me, just to be sure I don't miss him. I noticed a shadow pass through the headlights of the truck, which spooked me a little bit. Did he get out of the cab? I think he did. I don't stick around to find out and got home as quickly as possible. Now the pictures are a total failure. It's still drizzling. The flash combined with the drizzling just resulted in washing out the pictures. I could see the red cab, but no matter what filters I use, there's no way of making out exactly who he was. I'm terrified to drive home alone now. So last night, my sister, who lives 3 hours away from me, had somewhat of an emergency, asking if I could come stay with her overnight. So I packed my bags and headed there for 9 PM. As I was about an hour away from my apartment, I realised my car's not gonna make it. The temp garage was rising and I didn't want to risk it overheating in the middle of nowhere. So I turned around, and when I'm about 15 minutes from home my car overheats. At this point it's about 11:30. I pull off at an exit and waited for it to cool down. When I then get back onto the highway, it did it again. So I pulled off onto the side of the highway. As I'm waiting for it to cool down, I tried to start it again, and it wouldn't start at all. Now I'm a 23-year-old female, all alone, new to town. My boyfriend's out of town, so I start to panic a little. I managed to calm down and called my stepdad to let him know where I was and what was going on, telling him to call a tow truck. As I was on the phone with him, 2 cars pulled off the highway in front of me, then one behind me. My thought was that they're gonna help me, or that they're travelling together and need to stop. It was really weird to me that they pulled off at the same spot I did, with one pulling in behind me. They all sat in their cars for what felt like forever, but it was probably only around 3 minutes. Then a man got out of one of the cars in front of me and started walking towards my car. He walked to the passenger side, stopped for 1 second, then walked to the car behind. The whole time I'm describing what he looks like to my stepdad. He was then in the car for a while and walks towards my car. As he's passing, he punches the window and walks away. They sat there for a while, see that I'm on the phone, and all leave at once. God knows what they were going to do to me. My theory is that they thought I was on the phone to the police. I think they thought I pulled over without being on the phone to anyone. This keeps me up at night.